And, there's a lot of bartenders who don't really know that much about wine. When you make a connection with somebody who loves wine, your life is going to get better. That I can promise you. You'll start to be invited out to dinners or over the house.
I'm your host, Brian McCann, and this is the Road to Wine Expert podcast. Hey everyone, and welcome to the first official episode of the Road to Wine Expert podcast. It's been a long journey since I launched the Road to Wine Expert Summit 2 years ago on this day, July 10th. The interviews and all the content created in that initial push to discover what it meant to be a wine expert were too good not to share. And now I get to bring back all this amazing content I created and make it free for everyone, forever. And looking back at the summit after 10 days with 33 interviews, I noticed a colossal error. I pulled a Vanessa Williams, and I saved the best for last. I don't think many people heard Cal Fussman's interview, and I'd argue that not enough heard Cal Fussman's interview. If you're unsure of who Cal Fussman is, let me say Cal Fussman one more time. I first encountered Cal Fussman on the Tim Ferriss show. As an avid listener and Tim Ferriss diehard, Cal's interview is not only one of my favorite Tim Ferriss episodes, it's one of my all-time favorite podcasts. In his chat with Tim, Cal briefly talked about his wine experience for his column in Esquire magazine. Exploring the show notes, I read Cocktails Before the Collapse, the article in which Cal writes about his time as sommelier at Windows on the World, atop the World Trade Center. That piece was cornerstone to my leaving a corporate 9-to-5 in order to chase this crazy wine dream. And if you don't know me from the summit, you might be wondering, a magazine article seriously changed your life? It totally did. It made me realize that learning about wine, and frankly learning about anything, isn't impossible. If you want to maximize your time and get the most out of this interview, I encourage you to hit pause and go read Cocktails Before the Collapse to provide you a little bit of background on what Cal achieved, although he does get into it a little bit. So if you're ready to forge ahead with Cal's interview, I'll offer a little perspective. When I decided to remake this summit into a podcast, it was with one hope in mind, is that I could do the same for someone as Cal had done for me. So please enjoy my interview with Cal, and please enjoy all the other interviews as we release them, and we try and chase down this crazy wine dream together.
I had no idea what was about to transpire when I was working on this Perfect Man column for Esquire, and the thought came to me to master wine. I did this column, this was back in like 1997. The editor, David Granger, had just taken over, and he brought in a group of writers from GQ. We were all over there, and he was looking for ideas. And so one of mine was to figure out a way to correct all my flaws by going to experts in different areas. It could be learning how to speak better, how to walk better, how to manage your time better, and how to barbecue better, all the things that a man should know how to do. And one of the things that really hit me was I always felt really uncomfortable when I was sitting at a table and the wine list came to me, because I didn't know anything about wine. And I thought, wow, wouldn't it be great to just eradicate that fear? And so that led me on a path to Windows of the World Wine School, which was at the top of the World Trade Center. And that started basically a 2-year adventure.
Yeah, and it's one you've well documented in Cocktails for the Collapse, which was, again, transformative. So thank you for, it took you 10 years, but thank you for finally getting that story on paper.
Yeah, it basically was on my back from the moment that the planes hit into the World Trade Center and destroyed windows in the world and everything that was underneath it. And very difficult to go to the keyboard and write about a jubilant, joyful experience in wine over 2 years, where everybody you meet is so welcoming and they're offering you, taste this, taste that, try this, and look how it goes with the lamb. And it's just one of the most beautiful things to see people so giving. And then I master, or I don't master really, I accrue the knowledge necessary for me to, for one night, be the sommelier atop Windows on the World. And then shortly after, the planes go in and take the restaurant out. So it became impossible for me to balance the joy that I went through with wine, with the tragedy of what happened at Windows on the World. And it was only 10 years later where time sort of cleared away the dust and the residue and allowed me to see it clearly so that I could write it.
Yeah, it's a beautiful piece, and it's moving, and I think it's telling. It covers all those things, tragedy, and it's also jubilant. You know, I find myself getting teary-eyed when I read it every time, and I was nowhere near connected as you were, so I can't even imagine that burden.
Yes, I used to have dreams of after the attack of like these bottles of wine kind of falling through space. Like you could almost see the labels, these beautiful bottles of wine. And look, this, when you think of people jumping off the top of the World Trade Center, the wine means nothing. But my mind was my mind, and I would just dream of these wine bottles just falling and falling and falling and then smashing. Maybe it was a good thing. Maybe it enabled me to not be thinking about people making that same fall. But it really affected me for a long time, and it was actually hard for me to drink wine afterwards.
Wow. Thinking back on some of like the jubilant times, what was the best lesson on service that you got from Andrea while you were working there?
Well, Andrea Immer was voted like the best sommelier in the world, right around the time that she was teaching me. And it was also the time, I don't know if you remember baseball back in the late 90s when Mark McGwire was breaking the home run record and Sammy Sosa. Those guys were like hitting the ball out of the park. Of course, the ball was juiced, and so were they. But it was just amazing to go to the ballpark and watch these guys. I remember being at Busch Stadium in St. Louis and watching Mark McGwire hit home runs and just thinking how majestic it was. And then it really was like watching Andrea on the floor. It's like watching Michael Jordan in his prime. And what she did great was, here's this place where people, 1,000 reservations are coming in every day. It sold more bottles of wine than any other restaurant in the world. routinely, men are getting down on their knees and proposing to women, and everybody in the restaurant starting to applaud. So when you think of a place like that, you think, okay, you're going to go in there and they're really going to throw a high-priced bottle of wine on you, and there's nothing you can really do about it. Especially you've got guests at the table, you're overlooking this unique, rare view. It's the time to, if you're going to put down some money, this is the time to do it. And Andrea never, ever tried to milk that. She just wanted people to love wine as much as she did. And that's the biggest lesson that I got out of it. And she was a genius at being able to go over to a table, spend a few minutes talking with a couple or a group of people, and just understanding how much money they wanted to spend on the wine, and then giving them something that made them so happy. Because the bottom line is, if a sommelier goes to a table and convinces the person at the table to spend more money than they want to spend, and still brings them a great bottle of wine, the experience may not be that good for the person who feels a little uncomfortable for spending more than they wanted to. So the beauty is when you get somebody who came in thinking, okay, this is what I could spend, and then they get a wine that's amazing. And that's what Andrea did. And she just made people happy wherever she walked.
Sounds pretty amazing. And do you think that her gift, did it come from her passion for wine, or did she just have an inherent ability to sort of communicate and understand what people wanted?
I think when you get to what makes a great sommelier, it is really nuanced. You have to have that passion. That love of wine has to spring out of you whenever you go over to the table. Beyond that, you have to be able to almost like a salesman, I guess, walk over to a customer and intuit, all right, how much does that person have to pay? Now, some salesmen will just try and take everything out of the wallet. Andrea wasn't like that. She wanted to make sure that when you left, you couldn't wait to come back. And that's kind of the downside in a way to the waiters who just try to throw the highest priced wine on a table, or there's wine that isn't moving in the back, and the manager says, hey, let's get this stuff out of here, recommend it. And you do that, and you force people to pay more than they wanted to, or you don't force them, but you persuade them, and then it's not that good an experience, then they may not come back. So the thing about Andrea was, and it's funny because now that I'm talking about it, I can see that I had the same spirit in me, was when after Andrea waited on you, you knew that person was going to want to come back and they were going to ask for her. And after my night as sommelier, it was only one night because I was doing it to write the story for Esquire magazine. 2 weeks afterward, a woman who I had served on my night as sommelier came into the restaurant and asked for me. That was beautiful. That was really beautiful.
And so do you remember what you served her?
No. This is now, wow, 16 years ago.
Okay.
There are some people, I was talking to Wolfgang Puck, and a great restaurateur, And he was saying that he had a photographic memory of wine, so that he will taste a wine and it is like etched in his head, almost the way like a great sentence would stay in mind. So there are people who can do that. They can remember a wine that they served in on a certain day, in a certain month of a certain year, with certain kind of food. The same way, like Phil Jackson, the basketball coach, won all those rings with the Bulls and the Lakers. He can remember plays that happened through the course of games in certain years. There are people who are blessed like that. I was really not blessed that way with wine. It was more of an everyday joy of the moment experience. And of course, there's some wines, like I remember for a present, I once bought a bottle of 1900 Fonseca port, and like drank it more than 100 years later, and it was really stunning. That was a memorable night. And in fact, I gave the bottle to a friend of mine who has it in his cellar, and like he'll go and I could still smell it. And so there are those moments, but when you're serving wine, and especially that night, I was serving so much of it. It was almost hard for me to keep everything in my head. I should have had somebody going around behind me writing notes. It was more jubilation that night.
Would you do it again for one more night?
You know what? I think at this point, it's a good question, because I have to admit, there have been about a half dozen times in the last 2 years where I'm sitting at the table as a diner and the sommelier comes over, and I'm going to be completely open to that som making a recommendation, because who knows the restaurant and the wines in the restaurant better than the som? And yet there have been times where I looked at the wine list and thought, you know what, I'm going to order this wine, and the som recommended something else, and I walked out of there thinking, man, I should have ordered my bottle. So I don't know that I will be out on the floor, but I think I'm going to become a little more active in choosing, what I drink at tables. Because what happens often to me is I'll be at a table of like 6 or 8, and they'll say, "Oh, the sommelier, Cal, go ahead and order." And the bottom line is, it's been 16 years since I was doing this all the time. So I don't follow it as closely. I was living it every day back then. And I'm more inclined to ask somebody who really knows what's going on. What's your suggestion? But something is pushing me to get back into it in a way, in a more of a take charge way.
Sure. Maybe it's a musical pairing guide.
That would be good. That would be good. Angia put out some CDs. And I forget the names. It was something like, Chopin for Chardonnay, or Chardonnay for Chopin, something like that, where the music was linked to the type of wine. And so she felt the same way that I did. And it's music for your mouth. You taste it, and in my case, some people they talk about wine in the strangest ways, and they compare wines to dogs, to cars. Aside from the woody, nutty, floral words that never really seem to tell me very much. I guess when I could get it to a song people would have the idea that when you were recommending a great Barolo and you said, okay, Pavarotti sings this, people get the idea what you're talking about. Or Ella Fitzgerald in Champagne, those bubbles in the champagne with her scat voice. You can visualize and you can hear it. So that's all I was really getting to. I think in order, if you're going to really get this down to the song, you better be drinking a lot of wine and you better be listening to a lot of music.
I agree. I think the nice thing about music, at least in broad terms, right, is a language that most people understand or, have access to, in the means of, if you say a wine is sort of like the Beatles, right? People may not love the Beatles as much as you do, but you can at least respect the Beatles or know it's classic and know that it's representative of something. And it provides a context for something that people who are just starting out is so complicated and sometimes convoluted and full of BS that music, at least, is a really nice metaphor that people can talk about wine. It's a lingua franca.
Well, that's exactly why I went in that direction. Although I always try to do a little education so that people could understand, okay, you have no idea what the difference is between a Riesling, a Chardonnay, and a Sauvignon Blanc. And it was not hard because of the lessons that I got from Kevin Zraly, who ran the Windows of the Wine course. It wasn't hard to explain to people, okay, just imagine this as skim milk, whole milk, cream. And the Riesling is the skim milk, the Sauvignon Blanc is the whole milk, and the Chardonnay is the cream. And at least you have an idea of, okay, I get the texture. And you could do the same with Pinot Noir, Merlot, Cabernet Sauvignon, and then you add a Zinfandel, which is even deeper and richer than the Cab. And people can understand just by the lightness or the heaviness what they could or should match with their food. And so it's I think it's empowering for people just to understand that how different, they may not even know that a Chardonnay is white wine and a Pinot Noir is another. They may not know that if somebody talks about a wine from Burgundy, it's generally going to be either a Chardonnay or a Pinot Noir. So just the little information that you can give people at the start, I find it gives them a grip. And then if you can just throw the music there, it just stamps. It just stamps in their mind. Okay, now I know. Barolo, Pavarotti. Got it. Really the amazing thing about it, it's so easy to get cowed when you're just starting and the wine list comes. It's got so many wines, it's got all these prices, all these places, and you don't know anything. And yet, if you would say, okay, I'm just going to come into this restaurant every night for the next 3 months, and I'm going to drink 1 glass of wine. At the end of 3 months, you know a lot about wine. It's not that hard. All you got to do is drink.
Yeah, it is that easy. You're absolutely right. I think you can get so afraid because the questions that you start to ask are daunting. But at the end of the day, just drink and enjoy and find out what you like what tastes good to you, and then just continue down that rabbit hole, I think is some of the best advice you can give.
And you want to know the best part? So many people, and I saw Kevin Zraley do this in his wine class. He would sometimes wrap the wine in like aluminum foil, so you didn't know what you were drinking. And then he'd serve everybody like an expensive champagne by a maker that we all know. And then he would serve it next to an inexpensive champagne. And then he would say, oh, how many people like this one? How many people like that one? And I can remember one time where most of the people in the room raised their hand to the very inexpensive one. And it really tells you that there's a beauty in just being able to find what you love. And if it costs less, better for you. But there's so many people who think that the value of the wine is based on the price. When in fact, a lot of what I found is the moment is so important. Because if you meet somebody that you fall in love with around a bottle of $8 wine, that wine is going to be important to you for the rest of your life. And yet some people will just give it the back of their hand. The moment is so attached, in my view, to the wines. And even like if you're tasting wine and you've been just tasting some cabs, which are on the heavier side, or Zinfandels, and then you go back and try and taste the Chardonnay, it tastes different because of the moment you drank it in. You basically got to drink, light to heavy, or else your taste buds are going to be overwhelmed and you're just not going to get the same experience. So much depends on exactly when you drink the wine and what mood you're in and your friends and the food. It's a great adventure to go on. It makes me want to start on an adventure all over again. And you know what I would do if I was doing it again? I would basically start with the cheapest wines and then build up the price point. And just see which ones are the cheaper wines that I really liked and might want to keep drinking as I went up the ladder. That was something that I never got to do when I started, because there were just so many great wines that people wanted me to taste. And so I was really hit with riches from the very start.
Do you have a heartbreak grape?
Well, that's what I was talking about before with the Burgundy, because it's very pricey, and yet it's so unique. It's like a great red Burgundy. It generally comes from an area where the grapes are scarce, and so not much of it is being made. And you're going to be paying a lot of money for it. And you know what? I tend to, Burgundy was more of like the learning phase for me, I think. Now I tend to I veer more, I think, to two things. One, wines that have been kind to me. They're like old friends. So it's like sitting down with my old friends, or else, as I was telling you before, I go to the Somm and I say, all right, what do you got? And what are you recommending? Here's what I'm ordering. What can you do? There's a place that I like to go to. It's in Beverly Hills. It's called Wally's. And it's an amazing wine shop. Wines from all over the world. Anything you want, they can get for you. But one of the great things about it is there is a bar and restaurant in the store, and they always have like a lot of wines by the glass. So they'll pour you like a Penfolds Grange. It costs you like $175 for a glass, but if you want it, it's there. And so it's a very cool thing to go. The last time I was there, they had a wine from Sicily, another from Argentina, another was a Champagne, another was a Remy Chardonnay. And so you really get a chance to meet a new friend every time you walk into that place. And it's a glass, and you can match it with your meal. And look, if you do that every day, that's 365 new friends you met in a year.
Yeah, and if you can only afford to do it once a week, it's 52. So that's not bad either.
Yeah, I'm not in there every day, but it's just sort of the point, because here's the bottom line: you could go out with a bunch of friends, and even if you're starting with $8, $10, $12 bottles of wine that you're splitting, and every day you're just drinking a glass and a half with your dinner, and then you just started moving up as you're getting a better job and maybe having a little more money, and now you're drinking $22 wines and doing the same comparisons. I think there is something beautiful about that. The one thing I could never get was this idea of putting a point score on a wine. This wine is a 93. And it makes you really think about when you were in school and the teacher graded you in an English class and gave you an 87. I mean, how did she know your composition was worth 87 points? And look, Robert Parker is obviously a great reviewer and wine critic, and people have looked to him for years. But really, is a wine 96 points and is another 89? I think it's much more in line with music to me. Look, obviously, if he says it's 98 points, everyone's thinking, well, that's a great wine. Because Robert Parker says it's 98 points. But I would just rather somebody tell me that's Louis Armstrong playing It's a Wonderful World.
I totally understand. I think points can get so arbitrary. It's a whole nother aspect of the industry that's confusing. I think the positive is it's a lot of people's introductions into wine, and it gets them to be like, oh, look, there's a 90-point wine that's under $10. That's something I can afford. Someone else is saying this is great wine. Let me go see what great wine is all about instead of buying something maybe at the grocery store or what have you. And then I think it can set people off on that trajectory. So for that reason, I applaud it. But when you get into this, there's all the marketing and all the BS that's involved in, is this really 92 versus 89? It's hard to say. I mean, it's so much of it is personal opinion, for sure. And like you said, music is sort of like, okay, well, if you're not in the mood for Louis Armstrong's Wonderful World, this wine isn't for you. Or if you hate that song and have a bad memory of, someone who broke your heart while that was playing, then you
don't want to. Yeah, it's a very, very strange thing when you're first getting started because it's so overwhelming. I remember I went to Vin Expo in Bordeaux, where somebody told me, oh man, if you're wanting to find out about wine, you got to go to Vin Expo because everything you want to drink is going to be there. And so I went, convinced the editor of Esquire to send me out there. And then I got there and it was like football fields filled with wine. and I'm just wandering around. You could almost drown in wine. And people would be the people who made the wine, who represented the wine, they would see I was wearing a press badge, had Esquire magazine on it. And they would literally like reach out and try and grab me and, pull me over and make me drink their wine. And so you realize that, number one, I can't think of any other product in the world that has so many people making it and competing to sell it. So I see the numbers help because it's a definition. And while I see it, to me, it's just so much cooler to find a place, find a person who knows about wine to just talk it out with you. And it's especially if you could find like maybe a wine bar where they're pouring very small portions just to give you taste. That's, to me, a great thing. That's the way I want to be introduced, because then I'm just following my own tastes.
Yeah, ultimately, I think we all need a guide in this crazy world of wine. You need someone to sort of show you the way. No, they don't have to show you, they don't have to take you from beginning to end, but someone's got to lift you up and say, okay, here's the world of wine, and set you on your way, give you that foundation, like you mentioned. And then maybe you bounce around, maybe you discover some other producer, region, what have you, and then you find a new mentor. Because at the end of the day, I don't know anyone who's discovering, wine on their own. Someone's making it, someone's got grapes. So it's all a matter of connection. So it's just...
You just hit the bullseye. The whole thing is about connection. And so it's almost unfair to put somebody in a wine store walking around all alone, just saying, oh, okay, this is 94 points. You want to make a connection with a person. You whether it's a salesperson in a store who has that passion, the waiter, the bartender. And, there's a lot of bartenders who don't really know that much about wine. But when you make a connection with somebody who loves wine, your life is going to get better. That I can promise you. You'll start to be invited out to dinners or over the house, and different bottles are going to come out, and it's just going to lead you to a great place. Connecting is the key word here. I think the whole thing is to be able to discern whether the person you're connecting with has a true passion, or whether they're doing what you were alluding to in the beginning. They're just trying to use it to make money. And, maybe they don't particularly care if you're happy, but as long as they can get you to buy a bottle of the wine that wasn't moving in the back, that's what making them happy. So a lot of it, I find, is finding and making new friends. And I can't tell you how many times you go on this journey, you meet somebody, you have a great meal with the wine, and there's like an amazing bond that comes with this. And then maybe you don't see the person for 4 years, but when you do, you remember that night.
Yeah, it's it helps with the sticking, there's the conversation. When I ask a lot of people what's the last great glass or bottle of wine they had, it's so amazing just to watch their eyes sort of light up, and they can take you back to that moment, and they can describe not just the wine, and the wine is almost secondary. It's always the moment that surrounds the bottle or the glass. And they can tell me what the waiter was wearing. They can tell me where they were sitting. And that's really the cool part about being in wine or being in spirits. It's just that, again, the connection, the stories, the whole thing packaged up together. I don't know if it's sort of like terroir. There's not really a good definition for that word. But
well, it is. I mean, it's a great point you make, because we think of terroir as being like the soil and the environment where the grapes are grown. But the bottom line is that you walk into a certain restaurant and it has its own unique feel to it. And the somm or the waiters, they add to that. I mean, if you have a great somm, is basically saying, try this, and then you try it and it's just great. There's like nothing better than that, because you wouldn't know to ask for it if they didn't tell you. You know, that's why I love somm so much, because basically their whole life is spent in this area of passion. I've hardly ever met a somm who is not a passionate person and did not get excited talking about wine. And those are people who want to share. They want you to be happy, and they're not happy if you're unhappy. So it's really it's a beautiful profession, because you're getting to make people happy all the time.
Yeah, you're sort of like a tour guide in that regard. Not only are you showing people all over the world, but at the end of the day, if they take a crappy trip, nobody wins.
Yeah, it's exactly it. And if they are, like the same way the somm represents a restaurant, a tour guide who grew up in Barcelona is now representing Barcelona. And so if you leave Barcelona having a bad time with that tour guide basically has disrespected his or her own home. And it's no different in restaurants. You gotta walk out of a restaurant. I remember Glenn Vogt explaining to me, he was the general manager at Windows in the World, that the most important parts of the meal were like the first greeting and the last taste that you put in the diner's mouth. Because if you like messed up the first greeting and basically forced somebody to wait for an hour and a half, and you didn't send them over some nice dish or a glass of wine, and they're just getting madder and madder, goes back to what we were talking about before. You're ruining their moment. So now they're sitting down finally and they're pissed. And now the waiter or the somm goes over and they can try and do something with that situation, but it's hard. Things have been knocked off balance. Now, if you have a graceful, wonderful entrance and you're seated and everything is going fine, and let's say the diners don't like the appetizer, you can still make up for it with the main course. You can still come back with dessert, and the dessert can make people happy, and the whole evening could have been delightful, and they'll leave wanting to come back for more. On the other hand, if you serve a bad dessert, you are in trouble. People will remember. That's what they'll remember. The dessert was terrible there. I just had this experience where I was at a restaurant. It's a very good restaurant. It's actually like a vegan restaurant. So they kind of promote themselves as being this alternative with tastes that are just as good as any other restaurant. And I've gone there a few times and the meals have been fantastic. And then I went there not long ago and they served a dessert that I could not get past like 2 bites of. And I haven't been back since. there's just, if you mess up dessert, you're cooked, man.
It's very true. I had, it reminds me of a writing professor I had in college. I can't say it as eloquently as he did, but it was for it was for a fiction writing class. And all he cared about was how you started and how you ended. In the middle, he was just like, whatever happens, happens. He goes, but if I don't care about anyone who's in this story in the first 2 paragraphs, and if I don't have a reaction at the last 2, the rest is insignificant. So it's exactly right.
Yeah, and unstated in that is that the only way you can have that reaction at the end really is if the middle is good too. Right. But that's the thing. You've got a different pastry chef back there generally than you do the person cooking your entree. And so, dessert can be messed up. And if it is, I would think that it's in the restaurant's interest to trot out like every great dessert they have to make up for it, because you just don't want to see people leave that way. Even like there's so many great wines for after the meal is done. I mean, port is one of my favorite wines. Sauterne. There's just great Hungarian dessert wines. And it's almost a way to just ensure that the last taste is a beautiful one.
Yeah, I've eaten a lot of very nice meals, but if dessert isn't memorable, that's a lasting impression. That's what you leave with. That's a great point. I was thinking about as you were talking, and I can immediately remember, 3 of the most magnificent desserts I've ever had, but I couldn't even tell you what else I ate.
Well, there you go. There you go. You never get a second chance to make a first impression. And I don't know what the line is for your last impression, but it better be good. And I think that the person serving the wine should be on a careful lookout to see how dessert is going down.
Yeah, it's your last moment of intervention.
Well said.
Speaking of last, what's the last great glass of wine that you've had?
Well, when I started to talk about that 1900 Fonseca port, I mean, that comes to mind. I love Chateau de Cam. I don't know, and now we're talking about desserts, and I guess I just love like this sweet wine for dessert. And maybe it is because it's the last taste. Now, of course, I like many other kinds of wines, but that for many reasons, that bottle in 1900, it was drank at my parents' anniversary. I think it was like their 51st anniversary. And when you tether it to a moment like that, it just becomes exponentially better. And that's the other great thing. It's a great thing, and also it's a downside, because so many people hold on to bottles of wine for just the right moment, and then they hold them so long that the wine gets past its prime. And so you got to drink the wine at the right moment. You got to pair the wine with the moment as well as with the food. It really, I'm getting excited talking about it because I got to do more of it.
Yeah, I know I'm guilty of it. I hold on bottles, but then I have a rule that I imply that's like it's usually Thursday, and I just open something that I've been unwilling to. And my answer is, when my fiance says, well, why are you opening that? You've been saving it forever. I go, because it's Thursday. And that's just reason enough. You just have to force yourself over the edge. And more often than not, it takes a regular Thursday night and makes it amazing.
Yeah, I think you've just come on to something that a lot of people should jump on, and because it's Thursday, because it's Thursday night, and you just look into your cellar and you pull out a great bottle just simply because it's Thursday, and it's different from Friday, different from Saturday, and it makes Thursday special in a way that it never was before. And it probably makes Friday better too. And probably makes Wednesday better too, because you're looking forward to Thursday.
Absolutely. Yeah, it helps you get through that middle of the week stretch.
You've really hit upon something here.
Well, sometimes I can find magic, so I appreciate it. So, Cal, I don't know of a better place to wrap it. You answered many of my questions, and I appreciate all of your time. And thank you so much for your article. I would not be here today interviewing you and on this road to wine expert path that I've set myself on without it. So for that, I'm very grateful.
Well, thanks so much. One of the things that's interesting to me is that you can read that story on Esquire.com, Cocktails Before the Collapse, if you know absolutely nothing about wine. And you could almost follow my trajectory, look at some of the wines I listed, or even getting a Pinot, a Merlot, and a Cab, and putting them in aluminum foil, tasting them all, and seeing if you could start to pick them out based on that whole quality of texture, skim milk, whole milk, and cream. And I think 50 years from now, you'll still be able to do it. So the journey lives on, and after today, it may be time for a new journey.
Amen to that. Before I let you go officially, how can people learn more about you and connect with you?
I think the best way to do it is either through that story that I just mentioned, Cocktails Before the Collapse. And if you want to contact me, there's calfussman.com. Send a message, and Kevin, the manager, will get it over to me.
Perfect. Cal, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Well, you know what? I'm going to come to Chicago this July. Maybe we'll get together and we'll clink glasses.
I look forward to that. The first one's on me.
All right. I'll make sure the first one's a good one.
Yeah. You have carte blanche.
Whoa. Okay. Now I can't wait. Maybe let's make it a Thursday night.
If you become a Cal fan, much like I have, you should check out his podcast, Big Questions. It got released somewhere in between when the summit happened 2 years ago and now. So there's plenty of amazing speakers on there that you have to go check out for yourself. If you want more of my favorite Cal moments, check out roadtowineexpert.com. There you can find the link to Cocktails Before the Collapse if you haven't read it already. Beyond my forever thank you to Cal, I'd like to issue a few more thank yous. A big thank you to Kevin, the manager, for helping coordinate the initial interview and all of my subsequent follow-up requests. Kevin, you rock. Also, thanks to my podcast manager, Talia Goodman, for pushing me to publish, reminding me of deadlines, and making the podcast a priority. Thanks to Domain for sponsoring this episode of The Road to Wine Expert. Domain is the nation's largest network of wine storage facilities, but they don't just store wine. They can help you in every step of your journey as a wine collector. That means shipping, receiving, importing, organizing, selling, storing, and protecting. Speaking of protecting, Domain offers 2 amazing storage products, Domain cardboard boxes and VineBox, a stackable, flexible wine storage solution. For more information on both those products, you can go to domainstorage.com. They're also available for purchase on Amazon. And thanks to all the amazing music in this podcast. You heard tunes from the following. You heard Funky Souls by Amarià. You can find out more about Amarià at soundcloud.com/Amarià Musique. That's AMARIAMUSIQUE. Link is also available on our website. And you also heard Chill by Sakura Hertz, whose music can be found at soundcloud.com/Sakura Hertz, SAKURAHERTZ. Again, link also available on our website. And one final thing. I still have yet to get a drink with Cal Fussman. Our paths never crossed in Chicago, and we missed each other in Kansas City, and now, fingers crossed, we'll connect one day in St. Louis. So if you see Cal, tell him I said hello, and tell him that I still owe him a bottle of wine. Whether it's Thursday or not, we're all good.